The question is the starting of the Thanksgiving dinner and kind of the history on it. I can fill in chapter 1 or the early chapters, how it all started, how this community Thanksgiving dinner, and in so many ways it was one of the more unique things I've ever worked on. So at the time, go back to about 1985, 86, Jerry and Mal Halati owned what was then McNamara's, the restaurant in the Faribault Hotel. And through purely kind of just random accidents, both Mal and Jerry's fathers passed away that fall within a matter of weeks of each other. And, like one in September, one in October. And they just didn't feel that Thanksgiving was right. Mel was very aware that there were a lot of single people, a lot of elderly people that were living upstairs in the hotel at the time. So it's like, let's have them down, and we're a restaurant, we'll put something together, and we'll just have this little community Thanksgiving dinner. And word got around town that we were doing this, or they were doing this, and a few hundred people showed up. We rounded up some volunteers. How I got involved is I was their restaurant manager at the time. Interestingly enough, the night before Thanksgiving was our busiest time, our single busiest night of the year. So it was a zoo. So I was the guy that knew how to get in and knew where the stuff was, or at least where it should be. So that's how I came in. So that first year just started with these really humble beginnings. And we worked it at McNamara's until they sold the business in 1992, maybe 93. And then what happened, we were kind of just orphans for a while. We ended up at the, I can't remember in which order. I think we were at the high school first for a couple of years. We were at the middle school. They weren't real great venues for us, because one thing that made this truly unique is that we ran it like a restaurant. It was just that simple. You were greeted at the door by a host. You were taken to a table. You were waited on by servers. They would come and, bring your food. If you needed a second plate, they were removing the plates. It was incredibly labor intensive, but we ran it like a restaurant. We then ended up, the people at the time that were running food service at American Legion took pity on us, and we found a really good home at the Legion. There was a stretch, and I forget for how long, 10 or 15 years, we were at the Legion, putting out some real serious numbers of meals. I want to say it was like 1,000 that we delivered, probably another 1,000 that we fed in-house. What I remember was I ran the dining room. And how Jerry and Mal put it together, and it was really kind of smart, is there was no central organization. There were people in charge of departments. Pete Johnson was in charge of delivery. Linda Boudreau, her husband Jim, they worked under Pete. Jerry Heyer from State Bank was in charge of cutting the pies. So there were these, for lack of a better word, department heads. There was maybe, let's say, 8, 10, 12 of us that we knew our thing. I knew the one piece of it. I ran the dining room. I needed the better part of 40, 50 people in that room for servers and host to do the job. In the kitchen and the other ancillary stuff, and then throw in the delivery people, you needed over 100 volunteers. What was always fun about that is I'd always do a show of hands. I was kind of the volunteer wrangler. And I'd do a show of hands. We'd start serving at about 11, so about 10, 15, 10:30, of how many were returning volunteers and how many were completely new. And every year it was this really cool mix. There were returning volunteers that had been with us 10, 15, 20 years. But then it was 40, 50% every time they were brand new volunteers. So we always needed the new volunteers. And it was a incredibly unique operation that we had. Jerry, and this was long after Jerry and Mal were retired. They weren't even living in Faribault anymore, but they still came and ran this, and I was their right-hand guy, and I just said that I never wanted to run it. I was their number 2 guy. So when the Halatis eventually were done and handed it off, that's when I went off into retirement. And then you're talking to other people that then took it over after that. But like I said, for my role to talk about the early chapters and the early days of how this got started so humbly, and this kind of grew into a really big community-wide effort, both from the volunteers and the people that showed up.
So I'm Laura McCauley. I run the Community Thanksgiving Dinner. I started probably 7-8 years ago. Shelly Halati and her family started it, and she was looking for volunteers, so we as a family went down. We volunteered for 2 to 3 years, and then Shelly was moving to Florida, so she asked for me and Julie Fox to take over. And then about 1.5 years ago, Julie stepped away, but we are so thankful for her years of service. I cannot thank our community enough for the donations that they give us for this. Hy-Vee, Fairway, the Turkey Store, Aldi's, Walmart, they all donate great amounts of food for this free event. And in the past, we've had several wonderful volunteers. My husband Travis tends to help me, as do my kids. They've both grown up doing it. Joel Hansen runs our dining room for us. Dusty Deans runs the Meals on Wheels for us. So we just welcome all volunteers, and it's been a great experience.